the 2021 vintage. So give a few minutes here. Everyone's going to file in. I hope everyone's drinking something nice today. Hope everyone's thirsty to talk about harvest. Maybe some people are excited to say, oh God, I'm so glad we're done with harvest.
Yes.
Welcome everyone. Welcome. Come on in. All right, I'm seeing folks come in. Thank you. Welcome everybody. All right. Okay, well, I'm gonna get going here because we're excited to talk about Harvest 2021. I'm your host, Phillippe André, U.S. Ambassador for Charles Heidsieck Champagne, and the DJ for IPNC 2022. I can't wait. It's my first IPNC, so you guys have to go easy on me, but I can't wait to come back to the Valley. It's been way too long. I am a Pinot Camp alum, so I'm so proud to always rep the Valley when I can. So thank you guys for thinking of me. And thank you to my panelists for joining us today from all around the world to talk about Harvest 2021. So I'm going to start off here. We're going to kick it around. We're going to start off with Ian. So Ian, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself and give us a little synopsis of Harvest 2021 for you guys at the property.
Phillippe, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ian Burch, and I'm the winemaker at Archery Summit. I've been all over the world of wine. So I studied at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and while
Mustangs.
one of my teacher and counselor always talked about Oregon being like the place to be. He always said if he could rewrite his life, he'd come up to Oregon because there's a lot of water, it's beautiful, and I've slowly fallen in love with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay over the course of my career. But I've worked in the Loire, Burgundy, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, and I moved to Oregon in 2008 and helped start up Evening Land and meandered my way towards Archery Summit. So very, very, very great estate to be at. We're in the Dundee Hills. We've got 5 different vineyards that we own, operate, and farm, and we just transferred to organics and biodynamics, which I'm very happy about in the vineyard. So I'm learning a lot in the Dundee Hills. My first harvest was 2018, and I cut my teeth in Oregon in 2008 in the Yosemite Hills. And although they are both on volcanic soil, still learning a lot about what Dundee does. But yeah, it's a very exciting journey. And Phillippe, do you want me to talk about harvest after everybody introduces themselves? Is that all right?
I think actually, if you would mind just popping right into it,
Yeah.
let us know what you're seeing, and then we'll catch everyone around the room here.
Totally.
Yeah.
So the growing season, I mean, every growing season's different. I feel like it started out pretty normally. We had the weirdest freeze ever in mid-February. So all the tree branches got coated with ice and started falling down, as did many shrubs on electrical lines. And then, you know, some of us were out of power for days. I think I was out of power with my family for almost 2 weeks. So I'll always remember 2021 from that standpoint. But other than that, it was fairly dry. The only rain we got was during pollination. So it was strange because a lot of the berries had kind of kicked out their flower parts. And in some sites we're like, oh, we're gonna be fine. They've already pollinated. But because it got hot and then it got cool and then it rained, there were some flowers that came out right before the rain, and we thought we were going to lose that fruit because it was going to get wet and it wasn't going to be able to pollinate. But oddly, the stuff that kind of threw out their flower parts right before the rain ended up pollinating the best, and the stuff that we thought had pollinated before didn't pollinate very well. So it made for a really interesting crop from that standpoint. We had one of the hottest days, or the hottest day Oregon has had. We had almost 118 degrees, and everybody was kind of biting their fingers, hoping that they didn't get a lot of sunburn. And we came out of that pretty well. We didn't lose much crop. Younger vines got a little bit of burning of the leaves in the fruit zone, and you know, we started to like resurrect the irrigation of like the early 90s, just like, oh geez, like how does this work? Like, let's get some water on these vines and help them. Incredible observation for own rooted vines. They did really well through all that, especially. But for harvest itself, some of these clusters that didn't pollinate very well, I mean, we're talking like 20 berries per cluster. In some cases, it's like, I don't even know how this is going to work. But some of these wines that came off of that fruit, they're like they're so like waxy and full. They're very aromatic. Some of the wines, it almost felt like you could like eat the wine with like a spoon. They're just so packed full, but there's still an elegance to them. We found that a lot of the fruit ripened about the same time. They were all around the same bricks, and our harvest as a result was very condensed. So we started picking very early, September 1st, for our Chardonnay program. And then we started pulling in Pinot Noir on September 3rd. No, September. Yeah, September. Yes. So yeah, I think from that standpoint, being a little bit early was nice. And then I think, yeah, the wines are very aromatic, beautiful tannins, and I think everything's behaving very well right now. And I couldn't be happier. Yeah, that's 2021 in a nutshell for us.
So, well, thank you, Ian, for that update. Maybe for folks that are not familiar with, harvest dates and timing, how dramatically early was this compared to, say, 18 or 19 or 20 for you comparative to this year?
It's a great question. We're about 2 weeks, I would say, sooner. I mean, we tend to pick on it's so funny. Like some people say like early side. I call it the fresh side. It's our
the right side.
The right side. The trajectory for us is like low alcohol, high acid, very fresh. Don't let the fruit oxidize on the vine. The later you go in the season, the more susceptible you are to, the elements of the rain. So for us, definitely earlier. And then I think because of the way the season behaved with all the heat, the clusters were a little bit smaller. Some of those areas that pollinated especially well, we hung way more fruit than we normally did. And I was a little bit greedy in some blocks because I knew others would be really low. But I'd say we're probably about 25% down from where we typically are. But yeah, I hope that answered your question, Phillippe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's important because when we talk about vintage and harvest dates, a lot of times people have no idea what early means.
Right.
And so when you say, oh, we're a month early, like that's scary. Or if we're just like a week early than previous years, I think people understand that, there is a variation, obviously. So obviously you mentioned the heat, the 116 degrees high. I saw a couple memes that went around on that. Did you see any of those memes for Oregon harvest be like, and guys on fire, like literally?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, we were driving from Southern California, which is usually hotter, to where we live in the Willamette. We live on a vineyard out in the Willamette, and it was hotter in the Willamette than it was in Southern Oregon. It was like, this is weird. Yeah. And then, we're traveling with the 2-year-old, and going on a road trip, you got to pull over and deal with those diapers. And I just remember like standing on the concrete, like I feel like I'm standing on the sun, this is ridiculous. I could have come up with a meme myself with changing baby diapers on a road trip. It was just so hot. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. But I think the vines, like, I feel like if they were in a different growth stage, like if the skins were softer and we were a little bit more advanced, we would have been pummeled. Because that soft skin is just, it's like a soft little, baby skin that the sun can really hurt. But because we got the heat earlier on, I think that there's a little bit of resiliency to the fruit. The skins were a lot thicker, they were less developed. So, I mean, if we were going to get a heat spike, that was probably the best time to get one. But yeah, I'll never forget it.
And real quick, before we move on, how would you rate the vintage, say on a scale 1 to 5? And I'd like to hear your thoughts in terms of longevity of the vintage.
I would say, I mean, I'm honestly, and I don't say this every vintage, I'm not like, oh, this is the best vintage ever. But I would say, 1 out of 5. I'm like, I usually use a 10-point scale, but if it's 5, I'm going to say 5. I'm gonna rate this one a 5. I think that, the North American market especially, there's a generosity people love. Just this, it's colorful, but it's elegant. There's like nuance, but it's generous. And, I think, I think it's going to go down in the history books as being like, especially, just full of character. Whites, reds, and you're going to see a lot of variability too. How people farmed, what people did in anticipation for the heat, how people picked. So I think it's going to be a riper vintage, but I still think we're going to see a lot of differentiation amongst producers, which are vintages I love, so that we're not all dealt the same exact card. So I'd say a 5, and there's going to be a lot of fun renditions of this vintage depending on the winemaker.
We're looking forward to it. And I've had the privilege and experience of tasting older wines from the Valley. Maybe where would you say, let's talk about Pinot Noir specifically, longevity of the Pinot Noirs that you guys made. Are we talking, 10, 15 years? Are we talking 20, 30 years? Where do you see this type of vintage living on?
I love these questions. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day when we're tasting.
I want to know your crystal ball. Tell us what's in the crystal ball.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's like one lot I feel like it's just evolved. It evolved on the vine more than I'm used to, because I tend to get them in, sooner. We usually pick like 22.5 to 23.5 bricks, and we got closer to the 24 and sometimes 24.5. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be the 10-year vintage. I think like 2019, a little bit more ethereal, lots more acid. I think those are going to age beautifully. I think that, I think that this vintage is not going to be as long-lived in bottle, more pleasurable in the short term, I
think. But approachable earlier on, you're saying.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, last one before we move on. What's your Lumpy's karaoke song?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I think I drank too much to remember. It's funny. I've only been to Lumpy's once, and
once is enough.
It was OPC. It was this group, and I was like, I've never been to Lumpy's, guys. I've heard about too many people getting in fist fights there. I've got stories. We'll do that later.
Oh man, nothing.
Too many Jello shots.
But we had Jello shots. I didn't eat a pickled egg, but that is such a good question. I might remember towards the end here, but I'll tell you what, it was a blast, and it's only been once.
That's straight out of a Portlandia episode. Winemakers fist fighting at a dive bar, so they can. Who wants to play the next song? We're fighting over who gets to sing George Michael, "Careless Whisper." Anyway, thanks so much, Ian, for the update. We're going to move on a little further south to Nicole. Welcome, Nicole, from J Vineyards.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about still and sparkling. So please introduce yourself to our guests and tell us what's going on at J Vineyards.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Hitchcock. I am head winemaker at J Vineyards and Winery. And if you are familiar with us, then you know that we pretty much have a dual focus on Pinot Noir and very site-specific and Russian River, as well as sparkling. So we've got a pretty diverse portfolio. It's a lot of fun as a winemaker to be able to dabble definitely across so many vineyards. We farm 6 estate vineyards across the region throughout Russian River and Sonoma Coast, and we source from several more. So it is like Ian. I have always dreamed of being a winemaker here in this region. I grew up on the Central Coast in Carmel. California born and raised, but I've always loved Sonoma County for many reasons. So when I had the opportunity to become a winemaker at J in 2015, I jumped at the chance, and it's really been a blast. So a little bit about the 2021 harvest season. Man, I think we approached the season with a lot of optimism. However, there were some serious headwinds. As you all know, we were entering the second or third year of drought here in California, and the last few years had brought all kinds of drama, wildfires, et cetera. And so, I think you talk to any winemaker from Russian River, and all we really wanted was a drama-free and just you're a typical vintage, right? So we got what we asked for, which was really, really nice. The season started off kind of typical timing. We had some kind of cooler weather during the spring, which really slowed down vine growth. But then we were able to kind of move forward with it as the summer progressed. Obviously, with the drought, that required us to kind of take a different approach and to be really thoughtful in terms of what our practices were going to be in the vineyard. We had the threats later on of not even being able to receive any water. Fortunately, that didn't happen with any of Jay's vineyards. But it was always a threat. So our approach there was that we started irrigating a little bit earlier than we normally would have, and then we were consistent, but more frequent and with less volume going to the grapes, basically, to try to keep the vines nice and hydrated. Boost the canopies early on so that we could get some nice clusters forming and get that fruit to the finish line. And it absolutely worked. So that was great news. We kicked off harvest beginning of August, which is typical for sparkling. Gosh, some years we've started with our sparkling harvest at the end of July. This was not one of those years. It was second week of August that we got rolling. And once we started harvesting, it was very consistent all the way until the end. There were no lulls. There were no big spikes in terms of, hey, we had a big heat wave and we need to bring everything in. Instead, it was very consistent. We were able to pay a lot of attention to every lot that we brought in, which was very nice. That's kind of a winemaker's dream, to have a nice cadence throughout the harvest season. We started bringing in Pinot Noir towards the end of August. And then we wrapped everything up mostly by the end of September. We had a few lots come in early October, but that was it. So the other thing is that what we really saw was a lot of flavor development early on, which is also a winemaker's dream. It's really nice to be walking your vineyards and you don't think that if you just look at the analysis, you don't think you're anywhere near where you need to be for harvest. But then you walk through the vineyard, you taste the fruit, and organoleptically, you're getting close. So that's great, because that means we can harvest earlier, preserve, all of the nice acidity, and we've got just that flavor that we're looking for. Ultimately, we don't have to hang the fruit and deal with any of the risks that would be involved with that. So that was wonderful. Overall yields were moderate to low in some instances, not as low as up in Willamette, but we were average to a little bit light. And overall, nice small berries, really nicely concentrated. And it's a vintage that I'm particularly excited about. It was very consistent across all of the varieties that we produce. So for our sparkling Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and then of course for our still Pinot Noirs, super consistent quality. And I have high expectations for what's to come.
Very cool. Appreciate that. And that's exciting to hear that things are going so well this year for you guys. I think some folks that are watching maybe want to hear what's the difference of harvest time between the sparkling crop versus your still crop.
Sure. So sparkling, we're harvesting, if we're talking about bricks. For our still Pinot Noir, we're harvesting a little bit riper than Ian, for example. So we're harvesting right around 24 and a half or so bricks, give or take, but totally dependent on flavor and acidity levels. With sparkling grapes, we're harvesting closer to 19 bricks, give or take, and then again, hyper focused on acid and flavor development. So they're quite different. We're bringing in the sparkling much earlier. You know, we typically start our sparkling harvest right around the beginning of August on any given year, and normally we wrap it up by, call it, first week of September, even in our coolest sites. You know, we harvest off of a particular vineyard in the very south of the Russian River Valley AVA. So it's super impacted by the Petaluma Gap. It's really cool. You get these winds every day, and beautiful, beautiful quality sparkling fruit, but that does tend to come in a little bit later. But even so, it's, you know, like first week of September.
You're kind of just always managing each site and determining where that's, you know, I think a lot of times people forget that you almost become like this this like Jenga player in a way, and not only in the vineyard but also in the cellar. What is it like to try to manage all of that at once, and you know, how do you stay sane during that process?
I think my morning vineyard walks keep me sane because I'm out in nature and it's absolutely beautiful. And sometimes people can't get a hold of me if I'm at a cell phone reception. So that's how I stay sane.
Yeah.
But it really is quite the puzzle. We have an idea beforehand what order the fruit's going to come in. So what we're hoping for is a nice even spread across the season so that everything doesn't need to come in at once. Obviously, every winery has capacity constraints, cooperage constraints, et cetera. And
it's funny how that works out. It's like nobody has enough room, but yet somehow we get it done, right? I mean, that's just the constant, you know, hey, we're doing more with less, but I appreciate that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. We always make it work somehow. So, and this year in particular, this was probably the best, most even cadence I've ever seen as a winemaker. So that was fantastic.
Wow. Easy to sleep at night when that happens, right?
Yes, easier. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So now in terms of sparkling wine, you guys, do you do a multi-vintage blend, or is it always a vintage every year?
We produce 12 different sparkling wines across our portfolio. So that includes non-vintage or multi-vintage blends as well as vintage blends. So different in that respect, and then across an array of different styles from extra brut all the way to demi-sec.
Will we see a 2021 vintage?
Absolutely. Okay. My team and I sat down and did a whole inventory tasting of all of our sparkling lots a couple weeks ago, and we were blown away. There was every single wine had something exciting going for it. So blending season is going to be a breeze and a lot of fun. So quality looks great, and I'm excited to see how they turn out.
That's amazing. All right, and I already asked Ian what his karaoke song is, so I got to follow suit. So what's your karaoke song?
Oh goodness, I've only recently gotten into karaoke,
okay.
and the other day, I don't know, I decided I wanted to go back to, you know, late 80s, early 90s, and so I turned on some Bobby Brown. So Bobby Brown, every little step I take. That's next on the list. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I feel it. And then while you're, you know, those long nights, long days during harvest, what's your like end of day drink of choice?
Yeah, you know, it typically is not wine, surprisingly, just because it's of all the acidity and build up in your mouth over the course of the day. So man, a nice cold beer from Russian River Brewing Company is you know, little Pliny the Elder is what suits me the best.
Yeah, it's really nice when it's down the street. That's really convenient, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And I have to ask, have you ever seen a fist fight at the bar at the
I have not. Okay. But
so it's just Oregon is wild. Okay, got it. Awesome. I wanted to go back to the still vintage for you guys. What do you think in terms of longevity of the vintage this year?
You know, I always find that hard to say. I would say that, you know, that this is it's probably an 8 to 10 year for, for some of our small lots, some of our more concentrated and higher end Pinots that we produce, which is, that's not atypical. I think very consistent quality across the Pinots. I mentioned that we had all of that nice phenological development early in the ripening phase. And so what that translated to in the winery was nice, clean, consistent ferments, and just an overall beautiful balance, really nice acidity levels. So I think, you put all of those things together, I think it bodes really well for longevity and aging. And I would say 8 to 10 years for Russian River.
Right. Well, thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. For folks that are watching, if you have any questions, please add them in chat, and I'm happy to ask the panelists. I'm going to move on to our furthest attendee today on the panel, Lucie. Lucie, welcome. Thanks so much for coming in. Can you tell us what time it is there currently?
It is now 8:30 in the morning.
8:30 in the morning. Okay, so
Fine.
so you're in the future technically, right? So do you want to give me some lottery numbers that maybe could be helpful?
I'll give them to you later.
Okay, I appreciate
but
it.
It is Sunday morning here, so I'm well into the future, and I feel like the vintage we're about to talk about is a long time in the past. So
yeah. Well, we appreciate you logging in. Well, please give us an update as to who you are and how the vintage was for you guys this year.
Yes, so my name is Lucie Lawrence, and I'm the winemaker for Aurum Wines. It's a family vineyard, and we are in central Otago in New Zealand, but I originally come from Burgundy, so I'm a long way from home as well, but I've been in central for 18 years, so it is home here too. My husband is from New Zealand, that's why we ended up here, but it's a real joy to be making wine in central, and it's such a strong Pinot focus. Obviously coming from Burgundy, it makes a lot of sense. So as I said, it feels like the 2021 vintage was a long time ago. We're deep into the new season now, so waiting for flowering at the moment. So I'm going to try to remember the feeling of what we went through a few months ago. But yes, it was an interesting season. We started with a very mild winter, which we tend to be getting the last few years. Unfortunately, we get some mild winters, which mean sort of early bud burst, early season, but which is kind of scary for us because we can get frost into quite deep into the season here until we had some frost in early December here. So it's very unsettling on those little baby vines. So that year was no different. We had a few frost events, some hailstorms, and a very low snow line on the mountain that lined our vineyard. So keep us on our toes, which is always good, I guess. Keep us awake at night, frost fighting, but at least we can do that. Then the weather sort of stabilized in February. It's until harvest really. So the spring was odd, but then the summer was pretty good. So we had sort of variable crop levels across the region. It's actually quite a broad region, Central Otago. So the different sub-region had different flowering conditions, depending the varieties also. Like Chardonnay was low. We were about 20% down on Chardonnay. Pinots were normal, but normal because we didn't have to do any fruit thinning. So really low. It's just we didn't have to fruit thin, which was good. But yeah, so as I said, sort of across the region, a lot of variation, but at the end, good quality, clean fruit, and we picked when we wanted to, good physiological ripeness and not too high break. So very good at the end, but yeah, it was kind of keeping us on our toes all the way along. So yeah, overall pretty good.
Well, thank you for the update. How would you compare this vintage for you, say, going back 2 or 3 years?
It was actually probably the most sort of typical central that we could get in the last few years. We had some very odd vintage. 18 was really hot, 17 was really cold. So this one was sort of a pretty average, I would say, and what we would expect in central. So kind of a nice place to be.
Okay. So on the scale 1 to 5, what would you say this year?
Probably a 4.
A 4? Okay.
5.
And now I've also had some outstanding wines from your region with age. And I think a lot of times people forget age their wine.
Yes.
What would you recommend for the vintage 2021?
It's got really good acidity, which to me is always that sort of marker of if the wine is going to age or not. So it's probably a 10 to 15 year aging wine, I would say. Yes, it's looking good. Yeah, do keep your wine down, put them down.
The trouble is always not drinking them too soon, essentially, you know, so you have to store somewhere else. Otherwise you wake up in the morning and you're like, wow, why did we drink that, you know? So what is one of your favorite wines that you can think of that emotion when you were like, oh, I can't believe we drank that too young? Do you have one of those wines that you've done recently that you can't believe you did it?
No, not really. We're quite good at keeping our wine, actually. We you know, and we like to educate people on that, actually. It's we always have some older vintage open in our cellar door. I like to get people, we have a 2010 estate Pinot at the moment on tasting in the cellar door. Everyone can try it, and it's just fun to get people in the mood for, you know, we know that 75% of the wine are going to be drunk in the next 2 to 3 years, but hey, if you kept them, look what could happen. So yes, education for older one for me is kind of important, and always have that in the cellar door.
Excellent. I have to ask now also, what is your karaoke song? What do you enjoy?
We don't have a karaoke bar around in Cromwell, unfortunately.
What do you sing in the shower? In the shower?
Yeah, exactly. Let's do a bit of Purple Rain. Something like
Purple
that.
Rain.
We don't get much rain in Central Otago. So
okay. I love it. Thank you so much. So I want to really encourage folks to explore your region. What would you say is the most unique component to the wines that you guys produce in comparative to the rest of the world?
We get a real purity of fruit here. The light in Central is something else, and I think that really translate into the wine into a real beautiful purity of fruit. And then the winemakers are, able to listen to the vineyard and protect the acidity, which is something that could really fall out of wine when it's a hot region. We end up with some pretty stunning wine with that lovely purity and the acidity and a great freshness to them. So this is what I would look for in Central Otago wines. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that we always try to drink more, and a lot of times we drink what's in front of us. So I always try to make a point to drink something different than what's always in front of me. And it's not always so easy, but I always encourage people to explore. You know, it helps you to understand what you like personally, but also what else is out there. So thank you, Lucie, for the update. Appreciate you logging in so early. And looking forward to a great another harvest for you guys coming up here.
Thank you.
All right, Michael, how you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great, man.
Thanks so much for coming on. You are in the evening, I think, right? Or where are you?
No, I'm in Portland. So.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So my name is
Michael.
Michael Fay.
It looks so dark there.
Oh, it's cloudy. It's cloudy. We don't have that much sun yet today, so awesome. It's pretty normal for this time of year. So but my name is Michael Fay. I'm the VP of winemaking and viticulture for the Ebenstadt Estates, which is Domaine Serene, and right down the road from Ian over at Domaine Serene. And then I oversee the winemaking team and grape growing in Burgundy at our domain in Santanay called Chateau de la Crée, and we have 2 other labels off of that. So so I oversee winemaking at about 265 acres in the Willamette Valley, and then currently now about 32 acres in Burgundy. So I'm not going to get into the Oregon vintage because I think Ian covered it great. The only thing I would say is that the wines right now, like Pinot Noir, tastes like how it would normally taste in June or July. It's a really open, really generous vintage. I think the Pinots are going to come right out the gate being super open and juicy and fruity. And there's a good enough acid backbone into them to make them age for a long time, 20 years or more, I think, I hope. So yeah, but back to Burgundy. Burgundy was a challenging vintage. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Anybody who was making wine actually anywhere in Europe this year had really tough, challenging weather. We had pretty average timing for bud break, but right around when the buds were in Chardonnay, mostly when the buds were about an inch or 25 centimeters out, we got what was called gelée noir, and it's the black frost, and it basically is just an immersion layer above that just pushes down and freezes everything. In Burgundy, the way that we can protect, we dry farm, and we can't use water systems, unlike our neighbors in Chablis, part of Burgundy. They can a little bit use it. We used candles. So we had candles out on about 4 hectares, so about 10 acres of grapes, trying to protect them from the frost. And we lost quite a bit during that season, even with the candles. And people that didn't have candles or wind machines or propane heaters or whatever, some of them lost, and are making 25 or 30% of their whole vintage this year. Pretty tough start to the vintage. The vintage continued, and it was mostly cloudy. There was probably 1 month of summer in Burgundy, at least. And so that led to all other kinds of disease pressure. And it's one of those vintages where the top domains, the people that really are willing to put in the effort and really do what they need to do, are going to make great wines. And the people that didn't go out and drop fruit and remove leaves and do what they had to do and put it on the ground, their wines are not going to be showing as well. So I think for people that are really interested and really love Burgundy, I think you need to really concentrate on the domains that and trust make those kind of decisions. At Chateau de la Crée, we have a saying that we say, think Grand Cru. We have village parcels. We have 18 Climat in the Côte de Beaune. 40%, a little over 40% are in Premier Cru, and we have them all the way from Pommard down to Morange. But it's for people that really are willing to spend the money, essentially, to go out and protect your crop, you can make great wines in 2021. We went out on some of our Climat, some of our individual vineyards, up to 4 times to drop fruit. And then we had long days on the sorting line in the winery, 14-hour days sorting fruit with 12 people on a sorting line. In the end, we ended up with closer to 50% of what a normal crop is, but really more skewed to heavier on Pinot Noir and much lower on Chardonnay. But we had to do what we had to do to do that, bringing in harvest crews really early to have them go out and drop fruit that they're going to come back and pick 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later. Harvest lasted 3 weeks, which is pretty atypical. It's usually, it can be as short as 10 days and usually closer to 14 or 15, at least for us in the Côte de Beaune. Because it's only, a 10 or 15 minute drive from one end of the Côte de Beaune to the other. But when we got down to it and we did all those things that we were supposed to do, the wines in the cellar are really brilliant. The reds are very, they have like a jasmine character and are very fruity and not too harsh of tannins, even though they were picked at low bricks. And then the whites all have this floral and quince quality that's really, really beautiful. And that's across different domains. I went and tasted at the Hospice de Beaune recently, just a few weeks ago. and all their Chardonnays had that same character. I think it portends to a really long ageability for whites. And for Pinot Noirs, I think it's going to be dependent on which the domains that did, you know, the best cap management, the best extraction, barrel program. All of that's really going to come in handy in a vintage like this. But overall, with all the effort that we had to put into it, and I'm so proud of my team, our winemaker Pablo Bosch over there, Jean-Luc Wadablad, he's our vineyard manager. They worked their tails off this year to get what we could and to produce beautiful, beautiful wines. I just tasted them 2 weeks ago. I was back in Burgundy, and just they're stunning. And there's just a small amount of it. So for consumers that love Burgundy too, anytime you can see futures, or if you have a connection to any domains in Burgundy, I would say, you know, try to get your name on some of those wines as soon as you possibly can, because they're going to be limited. But if you have domains that you love, I bet you they're going to make good wine for you.
So out of all the climats that you have, what are you most proud of to work with?
Well, we'll see. So this year, we just purchased another 6 hectare. So like a little over 8 acres in the Côte Nuit.
A little casual purchase.
Yeah, we're going to call it Domain Evanstad, and we have some Grand Cru. We'll have some Clos Vougeot and some Bon Mar in Chambol, and then a lot of Premier Cru and some Village and some Pinot Blanc to play around with too, which is going to be rad. So putting those ones aside, because I haven't got to work with them, I have my ideas on which ones are going to be a lot of fun. But we have a vineyard called Clos d'Azong that's in Volnay. It's Premier Cru. It's really early ripener. So no matter what the vintage is, early vintage, late vintage, warm vintage, cool vintage, a little mix of all of it, that climat and that, or what we would call a block here in the US, or that one, which we make about 3 or 4 barrels of, and that's all we can legally. But it'll produce whatever you want on it, and it produces it early, and it's super delicate texture, but it ages really great, and it's always very, very fresh. It reminds me of our Grace Vineyard in the Dundee Hills. They have a similar kind of texture. I call it suede-like. It means it's like smooth like velvet, but firm like leather. So not soft, but just smooth. And it's like that every year. And I don't do anything. And neither does Pablo to control it. It's just the right amount of extraction, put it in good barrels, treat it nicely. And then in the end, it's beautiful, lovely wine every year.
So that would be beautifully well taken care of car. It just rewards you when you do what it needs to do.
Yeah, man. Yeah. If I could build a
garage
garage over it, I would for the hail season.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest difficulties for you, or differences rather, between making wine in Oregon in the U.S. versus in Burgundy?
There's a ton of cultural differences in working in France, and there's a lot more laws. So you have to understand what you can and can't do, and be super hyper diligent. But the main difference to me is, they have 4,000 vines per acre that barely come up to my knee, and we have 1,300 that come up above my head. And they have vines that are 100 years old, 40 years old, and 20 years old, and those are in the same row. So there's a lot of differences, and there's a lot of things that you have to figure out. We have similar climate, but we don't have the same climate. This whole thing about if you looked at all of the places where everybody on this panel grows grapes, they would say it's within the Winkler scale, it's 1,400 or whatever degree days a day or a year. That means it's cool climate in general, but when it's cool and when it's hot and when it's raining and when it's just no moisture whatsoever is different in all of our places in every year. And so you have to figure out in Burgundy, their vintage is usually the warmest week of the year, where in Oregon, ours comes, like Ian was talking about, 6 weeks or 5 weeks before we start harvesting. Our hottest time of the year is. So you figure that out, right? And then you have to figure, like, we try to implement some things that work really well for us, like removing leaves on the morning side of vines for airflow and to try to even up the ripening, because there's such little hours of sunlight on the morning side of the vines, the east side of the vines for us. But what you have to learn there is that those vines are like below your kneecap. And if you start, and they have very reflective soils with limestone and other schist and stuff in there. So if you try to do that kind of technique the same way you would in Oregon, you could easily get sunburn and burn your fruit, even if you do it early and expose it early, which is what you're supposed to do when you remove leaves. So we had to figure out how to do that same thing, but differently. So maybe it's removing leaves from the middle of the vine that still allows airflow, but allows some protection from the sun and the reflection of the sun. And then fruit dropping is also very different in Burgundy than it is in Oregon, because not every vine is as homogeneous as we have in Oregon and California, where, you know, these are big vines. They mostly, if you have them planted in a block that was properly planned before, are pretty homogeneous. And when they ripen, how they ripen, how many shoots they have, how many clusters they have. In Burgundy, you don't have that. So you can't go into a vineyard and say, okay, drop 3 clusters per vine, and that should get us to the perfect kind of, you know, target yields, what we know can get ripe in a certain place, elevation, all those things. So you really have to go in there and listen. You have to really, that's what you have to do. You have to listen. You have to explain what you want to happen, and then listen to them tell you how you could potentially do it on a completely different vine with almost an entirely different shape and where it is in relation to the soil and the sun and all of that. So it just takes it. So you try to get what your end result is without doing exactly the same thing that you do in Oregon, if that makes sense.
Just go the opposite direction, essentially.
It's not even the opposite. It's more about like I was talking about, like on the vine, you can pull leaves from the east side, or you can pull them from the middle, which we call tunnel leafing. It still allows airlight or sunlight and airflow. It's just not on the direct side that the vine is exposed to. Because in Burgundy, all the best sites, or most of the best sites, are southeast facing. So the more leaves you pull on the eastern side, the more you could be really over ripening, you know, really shorty vines that they have there.
Very cool. So is there any karaoke in Burgundy?
In Burgundy, I haven't found it yet, but I do have here in the US, my karaoke song is End of the World as We Know It by REM. Yeah. I just picked the one that had the most lyrics, that was the most ridiculous, and my favorite band of all time. So I try to do that. I make a fool out of myself. I'll do it in Boudamont if they allow it, in Bone if they start a karaoke night. I'll do it at Lumpy's. If Ian will go, we can each combined, we'd probably be there 5 times total. If we go together next time.
I'm your guy.
I've sent a lot of people there, and I brought some people on OPC there. Was it 2 years ago when no, it wasn't OPC, it was a psalm group that we had, and we told them to come in October, and we were completely done picking by October. And so we're like, hey, I'm going to take you to the vineyards, and then I'll just take you to Lumpy's, and, yeah. And everybody will be happy.
Like best trip ever.
Yeah.
So Michael, how would you compare this vintage in Burgundy compared to previous vintages in Burgundy, or, you know,
Yeah, so I've had 5 vintages working with fruit in Burgundy. This is the first one that wasn't warm, in some respect warm. We had, in 2020 was the earliest vintage, maybe the earliest one on record in a long time. This one was for sure probably one of the wettest and coolest through the whole year. And then we had other vintages like 18, which just had the perfect like bloom time and no frost protection and big yields with great wines like Chardonnays. Like you could pick them to the maximum of what you're allowed to produce there, and they had so much tension and energy and just great wines. 17 was a bit of a whirlwind for me because that was my first vintage at both Serene and Chateau de la Crée. So I would say what I can remember about that vintage was that it was solid. We had no issues, great fermentations, super clean wines, not huge volumes. Burgundy is so much different than anywhere else I've worked. I started my career in California. I went to graduated at Cal Poly as well, same college as Ian. And Burgundy is the most, it really teaches you for everywhere else that you work, and we should all have this. This should be ingrained to us anyways, but it reinforces the fact that you have to literally treat every vine differently at all these different times of the years, for pruning particularly, shoot removal for sure, any kind of leafing, any kind of fruit drop, whatever. It can't be like a program that you do when you have super homogeneous vines. You have to look at every vine and say, this has to be treated this way at this exact moment. Now, if you can transmit that to, if I could ever transmit that and really get that hyper focus for Oregon, it would be amazing. But you do it out of necessity in Burgundy, and here we take some things for granted. But that's the goal, is to treat every single vine, exactly how it needs to at exactly what time. And then the winemaking part's easy, it really is. It's the right extraction, the right, cooperage, the right settling time. Do you leave it on the skins after fermentation, or do you take it off right before, or even when it's sweet? Get it in beautiful barrels, taste it as frequently as you can, and then, hopefully in a year and a half, bottle it.
It's fascinating to go around the room here and hear different stories. And so I wanted to share with you guys kind of a little bit of a synopsis of what happened for us in Champaign. 2021 was an extremely difficult year for us. A lot of frost, a lot of hail. We're looking at yields a third of what we were anticipating. So it's a tough year. And we may not see a vintage 2021, particularly at Charles, because it's so important for us to add wine to our reserve program for our non-vintage. So I don't anticipate us seeing 2021 on a bottle just yet, but we'll see how they evolve. I think it's fascinating to see the struggle, the change, but more importantly, it's very humbling. So in many ways, I feel a little more relieved hearing your guys' struggles, even though they're all different. I think that's the beauty of our industry, and the end result tastes so much better after knowing that the struggle and the teamwork is there. So Champaign, being about an hour outside of Paris, very different than Burgundy, obviously, but we still have similar type of struggles. The vines are constantly, being pummeled with Mother Nature, and 2021 was one of those years. So long growing season, but frost and hail really was the story of this year. I asked our chef de cave to give us a rating of the vintage, and out of 5, I got a 3. So tough year, humbling, and the yields were extremely low. So for us at Charles, a lot of the wine will go into the reserve tanks to be aged, and also in our base vintage for our non-vintage program. So it's one of those things that you never know the hand that you're dealt, and I think that's the trend around here. So thank you all for kind of helping me to feel a little bit better and commiserate with the challenges that you all have. Do either of you guys have any questions for each other on the panel? And you guys curious to hear from anyone else's perspective here?
I had one for Michael. I've had the opportunity to work harvest in Burgundy before Oregon, and I always feel like when you're done in Burgundy and you come back, it's like, all right, I'm ready. And I feel like there's a lot of insight. You're kind of ready for it. All the fright and all those variables that you usually worry about aren't necessarily there, just because you're lubed up and ready to go. And I'm wondering, Michael, if you think you make better wine in Oregon because of your experience before harvest that you have in Burgundy, or if you subtracted that, if you think the wines would be any different.
That's a good question. Most of the vintages I have had in in Burgundy have actually kind of slipped within our sparkling picking and maybe the beginning of our still wine picking here at Serene. But, you know, I have a great winemaker, Rachel Sasadny at Domaine Serene, that can call picks when I'm gone. She organizes the winery way more so than I do at this stage too. And so I have great people in both places, so I can be at both harvests. But yeah, I would say that in Burgundy it does, because there I actually pick fruit, you know, and I actually do like carry fruit, stack it onto to trucks, drive it over to the winery, stuff that I don't do here anymore at Domaine Serene. And it gets my body and my energy like in the right place. And then in Burgundy, we have multinational crew where, you know, our winemaker's Spanish. We have a German guy in our cellar, Lucas. We have a couple of Burgundians, you know, in our vineyard, and Jean-Luc, who I mentioned earlier, vineyard manager. But you hear all these different languages communicating to each other, and everybody's smiling and happy. And even in a year like 2021, that's really hard. If you can keep that energy and that, like, you know, positivity going. I think there's, you know, people talk about terroir all the time, and it's absolutely the number one most important thing in where you grow and how you make your wines. But there's some kind of weird energy that happens too inside of a cellar and inside of a vineyard when it's picking. So because of the positivity that radiates over there in Burgundy and having this like just great vibe and team over there, it does pump me up for when I return to, you know, to Domaine Serene. And this year we too had like a 31-day harvest. You know, it was like August 21 to September 21 or something like that, you know. But coming back and experiencing something like that too, where I was like on the sorting line so much in Burgundy, like a year like this, and seeing, you know, a lot of fruit to be sorted, it made me go up and reinforce to the people on the sorting line too, that, you know, even the most tiniest little, you know, thing that goes by has an impact on wine. So just really, you know, key in on that. And yeah, so I think I answered your question, but yeah, it does pump me up big time to go from Burgundy to Domaine Serene, because I think, you know, for me as a Californian, I always wanted to come to Oregon and make wine, because I think it's like the spiritual home for Pinot Noir in the United States. I'm sorry, I know Jay makes awesome Pinot Noir too, but I'm just saying.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was curious. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, and that just brought up another question I have to ask, Michael. Do you guys have a teleporter at the winery to send you back and forth between each one? Like, how does that? How does that work?
I wish. I typically would go about 5 times a year, but then COVID happened, and so now I've just went 5 times in the last 7 months instead. But we built a brand new winery in a very old building, in 2 old buildings, one 300-year-old, one 200-year-old, and we just did that over the last, you know, year and a half, and it was just finally all the systems, all the, you know, cooling, electricity, everything was ready for us about 3 weeks before vintage. So I was coming quite a bit to make sure that was coming along in order. And honestly, this new winery helped us make so much better wine, because it had, you know, super modern cooling, heating, in a year like this where you need to have, you know, maybe only 3-day cold soaks instead of 7 or whatever. We could literally like warm a tank in 5 minutes. You know, we had brand new sorting line, a new press. We put a cold room in, so when we harvested grapes, we can throw them in a 45-degree room as we're processing fruit throughout the day. So I think all those things help to make great wine in a challenging vintage. Every little bit of advantage that you got, you know, it exponentially makes those wines better in those kind of years.
Anyone else? Any questions you guys have for each other? No? Okay. Well, again, I know we're coming here on time. Actually, we're past time, but thank you guys so much for taking an hour out of your day to hang with me, to commiserate about this difficult year. I can't wait to try all of your guys' wines. Thank you to everyone joining us today. Thanks to IPNC for having us come together for an incredible topic to get some ideas out there about the year. But we're hoping to see you all in July 29th. We'll be celebrating at Linfield College, and I'll be your MC. So come and see us.
Sweet.
There's literally 70 tickets left. This is crazy. So we've I think exceeded our expectations of the demand. So if you guys haven't got a ticket yet, please go to ipnc.org and register quickly. So thank you guys all so much for joining us today. Cheers to everyone. Cheers to Lucie for joining us from the furthest distance.
Yeah.
It was a real pleasure.
But thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat. Happy Saturday, happy Sunday, and see you guys very, very soon. Cheers.
Looking forward to seeing you at IPNC, Phillippe.
Yeah. IPNC is back.
Let's do it.